All right, hello everyone, and welcome to iTech 325 Systems Administration and Maintenance. I'm your instructor, Professor Will Sanders, and today we'll be going through our week 2 lab assignment, which is OS acquisition. During this lab, we're going to be extending what we looked at in lab 1 when we set up the VMware player, VMware Workstation Player application as our hypervisor on our computer systems. And for my Mac users, you probably went ahead and did VMware Fusion as your hypervisor. If either of those platforms didn't work out for you, there are some other ones that you can take a look at. I won't provide any tutorials, but if you do some Google searching, you can find some installation instructions on them or directly from their websites. So some other alternatives for hypervisors that you can use on your laptop or desktop are going to be VirtualBox, which will work on Macs and PCs, and then Microsoft Hyper-V, which is actually built into the Windows 10 operating system. It's just a matter of enabling the feature. So those are some alternative hypervisors that you can use, but we'll be focusing again primarily on VMware Player, and then if you need instructions for VMware Fusion, you can get those from the Towson CIS Tech Hub. They have a how-to guide. In this week's lab, for acquiring operating systems, we're going to look at how and where to go to actually download the installation files for 4 different operating systems. Windows 10 Professional version, Windows Server 2019, the client version of Ubuntu, and also Ubuntu Server. So we're going to get a good sampling of both client systems and servers, and also we're going to see the Windows side of things and some Linux, one of the popular Linux servers and client systems that are available to you. After we acquire those ISOs, those installation files, then we're going to actually set up some VMs in VMware Player. And then lastly, after we get the VMs set up, we're going to fire them up, we're going to turn them on, and then we're going to go through some of the basic setup that's necessary to get those machines up and running and get them pre-configured so you can actually start working with them and use them as machines, virtual machines. All right, so let's take a look at it. To get the operating systems takes a little bit, so I've already pre-downloaded all of the ISOs, but I'm going to show you how to and where to go to get them. And it's just some simple Google searching. So let's pull up our browser, and first one we want to get is Windows 10 Professional. So I'm just going to search for Windows 10 Pro ISO or ISO Direct Download, however you want to put that. The main thing though is when you get your search results, you want to make sure you're pulling the ISO directly from the vendor. So this first option here says Microsoft.com. So that's a trusted one. That's the one I want to go with. I'm going to click on that link to download. It's going to bring me to my Windows 10 download page. Here, since I already have Windows 10 on my computer, it's trying to give me an option to update. I'm going to scroll past that, and instead I'm going to go down to this Create Windows 10 Installation Media option. So with Microsoft, they've tried to make it a little bit easier for folks who want to put Windows 10 on their machine, and they have a tool built into their website that will allow you to create what they call a bootable flash drive. That's basically a flash drive that has a bootable partition, meaning you can boot up to the flash drive, which is something that you can't typically do, out of the box with a flash drive, unless you do some configuration changes. But with this bootable flash drive, it not only configures the flash drive to act as a hard drive that can be booted from, but it also puts the Windows installation files onto that flash drive, so that when it does boot up from the flash drive, it'll actually kick off the Windows 10 install process. We don't want to necessarily use it in that form. Instead, what we're trying to do is we're trying to download a copy of the ISO file. A .iso file, or ISO we call it, is a compressed folder that has all of the installation files needed for an operating system or a piece of software. It could be any software application. It's basically like taking all the files that would have been on a DVD if we were installing Windows from a DVD, taking all those files and putting them into a single compressed file so that we can copy them to other places and use them in other tools like VMware Player. So we're going to hit that download tool now. Instead of downloading the ISO directly, it's giving us the media creation tool. Once that finishes its downloading, I'm going to launch it. And go ahead and say yes to that. Again, I'm not going to go all the way through this process because it does take a little, like 15, 20 minutes. Depending on your network connection, might be a little bit faster, might be a little bit slower. To actually get the ISO, that will take a while, but for the actual install of the media creation tool, that doesn't take that long. So we'll sit through this. But what it's doing right now is it's getting the media creation tool set up on our systems. And once we get that set up onto the computer, then it'll launch a wizard that guides us through the process of creating either that bootable flash drive I mentioned before or getting the ISO. So first thing I'm going to do after the media creation tool finally loads, go through the acceptable use agreement, accept it or you can't move forward. Then we wait some more. All right, so now here's the option, our first options for upgrading. We can either upgrade the PC that we're currently working on. So this would be, for example, if I was on a Windows 7 or a Windows 8.1 computer and I wanted to upgrade it directly, I could do this option and I wouldn't even have to use a bootable flash drive. But if you're going to use these installation files on a separate computer, or in our case on a virtual machine, you're going to need to create that installation media. And the media could be a flash drive, a DVD, or just a raw ISO. And then that makes it possible for you to take that and use it on another computer. Here you get the option to choose what edition of the operating system that you want. So if we uncheck this box here, you see we got some drop down menus. It's already set to Windows 10, 64-bit, English, but if I wanted 32-bit or both, I could do that. If I wanted it in another language, I could change that as well by unchecking this box. We're going to keep the defaults though. So I'll just keep those and I'll say next. And then here's the part I discussed before. I get to choose whether or not I'm going to put this onto a flash drive or just get the ISO. I want the ISO, so I'll check that radio button and then I'll hit next. I'm going to skip this part because I already have the ISO downloaded, but after you hit next here, it just goes through the process of downloading that ISO file for you. Once the ISO file is complete, it'll ask you to save it. You can give it a name. What I did and what I suggest that you do is maybe create a folder on your computer where you're going to store all your ISOs. And I called mine Windows 10 Pro because later I'm going to have another Windows based operating system. As a matter of fact, we'll go ahead and Google search that right now. We're going to do a search for Windows Server 2019 ISO. Again, I'm looking for a trusted source. Microsoft.com, definitely a trusted source for anything Windows related. And then this is try Windows Server 2019. That's exactly what we want, because with all of your server operating systems and with your client operating systems in the Windows world, you get a you get trial editions of them. So if I download the Windows 10 ISO that we just downloaded, if I install it on a computer, I don't necessarily have to put a license key in. Just the fact of installing it puts it into trial mode. So for 60 days, I'll be able to use that operating system full featured without having to pay, without having to use a license, which is perfect for setting up labs and things of that nature, where you're going to probably erase it after a couple of days of playing around with it anyway. That's is the same case for Windows servers, except the evaluation period is longer. I get 180 days on this trial license. So we're going to search that. We're going to get Windows Server 2019. We want the ISO, so we can just click ISO there and then hit continue. It's going to request a little bit of information from us. So you put your first name, last name in there. For company, put in Towson University. For company size, I just put 250 to 999. And then for your title, just go ahead and put student, research academic student. Title here, researcher academic student. For work email, put in your Towson email address, and then you can put your cell phone number in there, and then your country, United States. So once you fill out that kind of demographic information, you can hit continue. It'll ask you, do you want to get some literature from them? You can opt into that or opt out of that. But then after that, it'll start the ISO download. So a little bit less involved than the Windows 10 Pro one, because it's not making it bootable for you. It's just giving you that raw ISO, but you can go ahead and get it downloaded that way. Next up is our Ubuntu. So again, back to Google. We're just going to search for Ubuntu ISO. Trusted source right here, Ubuntu downloads. If I look at once I get to Ubuntu's website, if I look at the downloads, you notice that you have different versions of Ubuntu. They have a version that is, created specifically for desktops, one that will work on servers, one for IoT devices like Raspberry Pis, and one for the cloud. So if I'm deploying it to something like AWS or Microsoft Azure, I have a cloud ready one. We want the desktop and the server one. So first we'll hit that desktop. We want the latest version, the 20.04. So you click that link and that'll kick off the download. And then you come back to the same page and you'll say get Ubuntu server. And then on the server, it's a little bit different. You're going to hit manual server installation. So the one here is to give you just the VM already created virtual machine. We could do that, and more than likely in the real world we would do that, but I want you guys to get a chance to experience the full server installation. So we'll go with the manual server install. So option 2, click that download link there for Ubuntu Server 20.10, and then that'll get you started on that installation. We'll rather get you the files that you're going to need for your installation. So once you completed all those downloads, again, probably store them in a single folder so you got all of them. You'll have 4 of them, 2 server OSs and 2 client operating system OSs. Then we can move on to our next step. Okay, so again, from the week 1 lab, you should have already had your VMware Player or your VMware Fusion software installed. So more than likely you have a screen that looks something like this. Again, on the left side of the display, what virtual machines you have created already, which is probably none. And then on the right side, it'll show you the different options that you have for creating or accessing virtual machines. So what we're going to do now that we have the ISOs, we're going to go ahead and create our 4 virtual machines. The process is pretty straightforward. It uses a wizard to walk you through step by step, so as to make it as simple as possible. But we're going to go through each one again because there are some nuances, some minor things that you'll have to adjust depending on the operating system you're setting up. So, but for all in all of these cases though, these are going to be brand new virtual machines. So we're going to click this create new virtual machine option. That is going to launch our wizard. In that this wizard, it gives us a couple of options for setting up this virtual machine. If we have a disk, an installation disk, let's say we had bought Windows 10 from Best Buy or something, and it was on a DVD, we could access our disk drive on our computer in order to get to those installation files. Or if, let's say, we were just presetting some of these operating systems, and we just wanted to set up the VM without actually putting an OS on it immediately, we could do that as well. But since we have all of our ISOs already, let's go ahead and set that machine up. We're going to click on the browse button so that we can look for our ISOs. And I'm going to go to that folder that I created. And the first one we'll do is we'll go ahead and do Windows 10 Pro. I'll click on that ISO and then I'll say open. Once that has been detected, we'll say next. Here, we're going to actually get a chance to name our virtual machines. So for our virtual machine and for your lab deliverables, the naming convention needs to be specific. I want you to name it following this specific format. It's going to be your first initial, your first name, your full last name, a dash, and then the name of the operating system, Windows 10 Pro in this instance. The location, you can just leave that set to the default. Is going to identify, VMware Player is going to identify somewhere on your computer where you can store it. So you just leave that set as is. Then hit next. The next part is going to ask us to specify how big of a hard drive, a virtual hard drive, we want this machine to have. We can keep the default on this one. The recommended is 60 gigs. It's not going to fill up that 60 gigs of your hard drive. It's just going to set the bounds for how big that virtual machine can grow. It can use up to 60% of 60 gigs on your hard drive, but it won't take advantage of it automatically. Then you also have the option of storing the machine in a single file, the entire VM in a single one big file, one big 60 gig file on your computer, or you can split it into smaller files. The recommendation is have it split because it makes it easier for you to migrate your virtual machine. That's one of the benefits of a virtual machine. You can actually take that virtual machine. Maybe I built it on this computer, but I want to have it on another system. I can actually migrate it to another system and then launch it in that system's version of VMware Player, and it'll run perfectly the same way it did on my computer. We're going to keep both of these defaults, and we're going to hit next. And then this is just like a summary. So based off of the type of operating system that I identified with the ISO, VMware Player went ahead and it set some of the other settings for me. It gave it 2 gigabytes of RAM. That's this memory right here where it says 2048 megabytes. That's about 2 gigabytes. It also automatically gave it 2 CPU cores because those are the minimum hardware requirements for Windows 10 Pro virtual machine. You can go in and adjust those later if you wanted to, like if we were using this to actually do production stuff, like to actually work with the VM, we could adjust it, maybe give it 4 CPUs if you have the hardware to accommodate that, kick up the amount of RAM it has. And as a matter of fact, I can show you that right now. Let's say I wanted to have 4 gigs of memory instead of 2. I can say customize hardware. And then it brings me to this hardware customization menu here. You see I'm already on memory. It's set to 2. I just drag this slider bar up to 4. And now that VM is going to have 4 gigs of RAM. And then let's see for processors. My machine can accommodate 32. So, but let's say I wanted to have 4 virtual processors. So I kicked that processor up. And then there's a lot of other settings that you can peruse, you can play around with too. But those are the ones I just set, and then I'm going to close that. and now we see that that's been updated. So now it's got 4 CPUs and 4 gigs of RAM. There's an option here that says power on virtual machine after creation. So if I leave that checked, as soon as I hit finish, it's going to try to turn on the VM. I don't want it to do that right now because I want to go ahead and set up my other virtual machines before we power any of them on. So I'm going to uncheck that, and then I'll hit finish. It'll do its thing. It's creating a virtual hard drive. I'm allowing it to finish creating that hard drive. Then once it finishes, now you see that over here in my list of different VMs, I have that new virtual machine available. I'm going to go through that same process for my other virtual machines. I'm going to do my other Windows one first. I'm going to do the server. So I'm going to click on new virtual machine again. Browse my ISOs rather. This top one, that's my server. I'm going to click that. It detected it as Windows Server 2019, and it says this operating system will use the easy install. That's cool. I'll hit next. It's asking me for a product key. I'm going to ignore that for now. It's also, you notice that I have some additional options for server. I can install the server data center core. This is our GUI based only server operating system. Remember that I mentioned that with servers, a lot of times not GUI based only, but the command line based only operating system version. Because remember, I mentioned before that sometimes with servers, as an admin, you'll opt not to install the full GUI because it just takes up resources that aren't necessary for you to use. But what we're going to do though is we're going to get the standard version. That way we can have a GUI. It's going to ask for a full name, so I'm going to give it my name. This is for your user. Actually, this is for our username, so I'm just going to use more of a username format. Here's where we create our password. So right off the bat is allowing us to create an administrator account, so that when we first power that machine on, we have an account with administrative credentials that can do configurations and make changes. So I'll set my password, a super secret password. And hit next. Oh, must have fat fingered something. There we go. You notice it kind of prompted me about not having the license key, but it allows me to move past that. So now it's moving into trial mode at 180-day trial. Same naming convention is going to apply here. First initial, last name, and then dash, and then the name of the operating system. So Windows Server 2019. Next, 60 gigs is the minimum, is the recommended, and split up the virtual disk. I'm going to keep that. And then these are my settings. I'm going to customize my hardware again. I like at least 4 gigs in that. And the processors will pump that up to 4 again. Oh, I forgot to uncheck the power on virtual machine. All right, so next, let's do Ubuntu. Let's do the client version. So the desktop one here. Here they want our full name. Again, each operating system might ask for slightly different information. Here with Ubuntu, the client version, they want my full name, and then they want my username that I want to have on the computer. This is going to become that admin account, and then they want a password. And we saw that was different for Windows 10 and for Windows Server. So like I mentioned, slight nuances, but pretty much overall, the process is the same. To client. Notice the hardware requirements are less for Ubuntu. Linux operating systems tend to be lighter than Windows. So that's why it doesn't require as much hard drive space and as much RAM and CPU right off of the bat. And then our last OS is going to be our Ubuntu server. All right. So you guys probably saw this error message pop up a couple of times. I let it go the first couple of times, but I just, in case you see this occur on your machines, what this is telling me is that in order to do virtualization, I have to turn on a feature in my BIOS. Remember BIOS from our lecture this past week. The BIOS is that basic input output system. Is the firmware program, firmware software on your computer that holds all of the configurations for how your hardware works. Well, in order for virtualization to work on your computer, that BIOS has to have a setting that allows for your hardware, the computer hardware, to be shared amongst more than one operating system. All of your modern computers are going to have a tool in them, a software tool that enables that. If you're working on a computer that has a Intel CPU chip, that tool is going to be called Intel VTX. If you're working on a computer with an AMD processor or CPU, they have their own equivalent of that tool. But either way, they're going to have that tool built into the system. You just have to go into the BIOS and enable it. So I need to go into my BIOS. So I'm getting this error message because I haven't enabled it on this computer. So I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to re-enable that. And then once I do that, then I'll be able to fire these virtual machines up and we'll be able to look at the last part of the lab. But again, if you get this error message, that just means you need to go into your BIOS, find that setting and turn it on. Okay. But you can see that even without being able to actually turn the machines on, I have all four of my virtual machines created. For your deliverable this week for the lab, what I'm going to want from you is a screenshot or a screen snip of this screen showing all of those appropriately named virtual machines that you've created. They should all, again, be first initial, last name, dash, and then the name of the server or the name of the client operating system that you set up on that virtual machine.